So listen to this. The Kenya Morans are the national basketball team that represent Kenya in FIBA contest. In this mini documentary, we'll be taking a closer look at the rise and fall of the Kenya Morans. The year is 2019. Let's go way back to 2019 because that's where everything happened. That's where all the magic happened. That's where Kenya made history in the African tournament. And the Kenya Morans were slated to be there. And this time, everything just seemed to click together, especially for the team, and the resurgence was truly on the rise. The Kenya Morans were slated in Group B, and this tournament was held in Bamako, Mali, and there are two matches against Congo DR and Nigeria, especially in the group phase, kicked off. So in their first test against Congo DR, things didn't go the Kenya Morans' way as the game ended 82-65, the Kenya Morans being on the receiving end of a loss, giving the first loss of the tournament. But heading into the next game against Nigeria, you had the Kenya Morans winning 81-69. And also Tyler Ongwae in that Congo DR game, he played pretty well. He had 20 points, 9 boards, despite the loss. In the Nigeria game where they dominated in there, Tyler Ongwae, he was all over this game. He had 31 points, 9 assists. He's 1 assist shy from hitting a double-double. Okar Karanga, he pulled out 10 boards, and just like that, everything was just clicking in there. So these two matches were the only matches in the group stage, and the round of 16 just kicked off. So with Kenya matching up against Cote d'Ivoire in the round of 16, Kenya won this matchup, and it was a close one, 85-83. A game decided in the fourth quarter, and I dare say it was decided, minutes to close out the fourth quarter. So this was actually a pretty tight game. Tyler Ongwae, he led in scoring again, 24 points, 5 assists. Meanwhile, Ronnie Gombe, he pulled down 10 boards. In this game, this is the game that brought the confidence to the Kenya Morans, and the next stop was Tunisia. And Kenya just continued their stomping ways, and they stomped on Tunisia 82-76 and just added on to their winning streak. So you could see the Kenya Morans at this point just won an all-time high. They were just doing everything they needed to do in there. Bushwa Mokota, 14 boards. G. Wisuba, he had 22 points in there. Eric Mutor dished out 5 assists, swinging the momentum to the Moran side, and belief and the confidence was just an all-time high on the team. In the semis, Kenya matched up against Morocco, and adding on to their winning streak, they won this game 96-66. And the Kenya Morans just really dominated in there, and they just blew the Moroccan team out. Eric Mutor had his best game on scoring as he had 32 points. Ronnie Gombe pulled down 14 boards, and Tyler Ongwae, he had 6 assists in this game. And it was actually, everything was just looking good. And the final test, they punched their ticket to the finals, and they're going to match up against Congo DR again. Well, Congo DR dominated the game in the third quarter, scoring 29 points and held the Morans to 10 points. This is the third quarter, and they won this game. They blew out the Kenya Morans 82-61, and they grabbed the gold from the Kenya Morans. But it was the tournament ended in an all-time high as the Kenya Morans settled for the silver medal. I mean, this was the highest. I dare say, was the peak that the Kenya Morans had. Despite the loss, Tyler Ongwae, he scored 21 points, and he had, pulled down 9 boards, and everything was just looking up in there. And despite the loss, I mean, this was actually a very good win, especially, and it added on to the optimism as the Kenya Morans finished number 2 in the contest. So with this newfound success, the Kenya Morans looked to be locked into major FIBA tournaments, major basketball tournaments all around the continent. But fast forward to 2020, in the AfroBasket pre-qualifiers, they got a win over South Sudan, which was actually pretty needed so that the Kenya Morans can add on to their confidence in there. And they won against South Sudan in the pre-qualifiers, which were held in January of 2020. Keep that in mind, Kenya versus South Sudan, because actually it's going to be pretty important, especially moving forward when you're talking about the AfroBasket. So the pre-qualifiers were held in Nyayo Stadium. It was the year of the pandemic, and the first window for the AfroBasket was going to be held in Kigali, but later on in 2020, which dragged on to November. So fast forward to November, the Kenya Morans were headed to Kigali and matched up against Senegal, Angola, Mozambique in Group B. So the Kenya Morans on the onset didn't look that serious, and the truth revealed itself on the court. I mean, there was, a bit of publicity going into their practice, but you could see they were not that serious in there. So the Morans got blown out by Senegal brutally. This game was so one-sided. This was the game that showed us everything that we needed to know about the Morans at the time, the lack of seriousness and preparation to the contest. This is what everything that we needed to know just revealed itself on the court. And this is the game that the Kenya Morans had that infamous 2 points in the fourth quarter. So this game was brutal. Senegal beat Kenya 92-54 in the worst blowout possible, and Kenya Morans just scoring 2 points a bucket in the fourth quarter. So yeah, that was brutal. All the so-called stars of the team were non-existent and had a piss-poor performance leading into the inevitable loss against Senegal. As Senegal was out to compete, the Kenya Morans at the time just looked like they just wanted to participate because they're in Kigali. I'm not sure what they were doing in there, but in the next game, the Kenya Morans matched up against Angola, a team that is a powerhouse in the continent, and match up and are top heavy, and they have the players in there who have made history in the continent. And yet again, the Kenya Morans lost, and they looked like they didn't want to be there at some time. Angola were lighting up the Kenya Morans and blew them out in the process. The final score was 83-66, with Kenya on the receiving end of yet another loss. So those are 2 straight losses to start the tournament. In the third game, the Kenya Morans matched up against Mozambique. This game was a win for the Kenya Morans as the game ended 79-62 with the Kenya Morans winning. So in the first window, came to a close, the Kenya Morans had a losing record of 1-2, which led to the dismissal of Coach Cliff, and Coach Liz Mills, got brought in to take control over the Kenya Morans, which is actually pretty exciting, having an Australian coach take over the national team in the next qualification window. So they got rid of Coach Cliff. Fast forward to February, where Coach Liz Mills had control of the team. The Kenya Morans matched up against Senegal yet again, and the performance was a bit better despite the loss. Under Coach Liz Mills, the Kenya Morans played well in the first half of the game, but in the second half, they reverted back to their usual ways, which led to the loss, as the Morans lost the game in the second half. Some players didn't play in the first window, played in the second. A guy like Bushra Mokota wasn't available in the first window. Preston Bunge wasn't available in the first window. So they were missing some players in there and really disrupted the team chemistry. So that also added on to how they performed in there. So yeah, I mean, it was brutal, especially losing like that 69-51. Okay, it was brutal, but despite the loss, they were able to cut the deficit. It wasn't as a bad outing as the first one. So the Kenya Morans at the time only needed one win to qualify for the AfroBasket, and they were not so sure about their chances because heading into that Kenya versus Angola game, you really never knew what to expect from the Kenya Morans. But the Kenya Morans did the impossible. They beat Angola 74-73. Qualifying for the AfroBasket. Okay, if you look at the fourth quarter, you could see the mishaps the Kenya Morans had, and which led to Tyler Ongwae's shot in there. And this was a game that was decided by Tyler Ongwae's buzzer beater that was heard around the continent when the clock hit 0-0. At this point, Kenya was locked in for the AfroBasket after not being in the tournament for a magnitude of 28 years at the time. So in the final game of the window, the Kenya Morans lost to Mozambique in a game I like to call a quit game, where they decided not to show any effort and they were nonchalant in the game as they decided to concede points, which resulted in a blowout. The final score was 44-71, an abysmal performance, but hey, they rested Tyler Ongwae. They didn't use majority of their effort in there because they already knew they locked up a place. And also to add some context, Mozambique hadn't won a game in the whole tournament, so they were 0-5 at the time, and they had they were 0-5 at the time, and they won their last game against Kenya. So the Kenya Morans were all-time high. They were just in cloud nine. They got so much publicity after qualifying. The press interviews were just coming along. And for some reason, they felt unstoppable. Meanwhile, the teams that qualified started preparations for AfroBasket as Kenya somewhat relaxed. As the AfroBasket date came close, at the time, there was a little bit no media. There's not much media in there, and the Morans preparations weren't that good. As news broke, like, they started training camp 2 weeks before the AfroBasket, as other nations took months to prepare. So, fast forward to August 2021, Kenya was slated to compete against Cote d'Ivoire, Nigeria, and Mali. Cote d'Ivoire and Nigeria, they met these teams. The Kenya Morans met these teams in the AfroCan 2019. But looking at the AfroBasket, they had revamped rosters in there. So it was just a different style of matchup. It was a different ball game altogether. So, yeah, the first matchup was against Cote d'Ivoire, where they were handed a loss. After starting the game well, the Kenya Morans capitulated in the second half, blowing the game. Tyler Ongwa's 25 points, Bushwa Mukota's 11 boards, and Stu Makemba's 6 assists were not enough to put the Morans over the edge, as the Kenya Morans lost 88-70, a recurring norm when facing big teams. So the Kenya Morans, they lost their first game, and the next matchup was against Nigeria. So Albert Odero headlined this game. Despite the loss, he had 23 points and pulled down 8 boards. Despite the loss, Albert had a great game. So the final score was 71-55. As the other loss followed, I mean, it was just a revenge tour by Cote d'Ivoire and Nigeria, and I must say these two losses were actually pretty brutal at the time. And the Kenya Morans had to win a game, and they won a game against Mali. And to add some context, Mali also lost their game against Cote d'Ivoire and Nigeria. So it was just a battle of the losers at this point. So you just have to see who's going to get their first win. And Kenya won, finishing top 3 and knocking off Mali, and to move on to the next round. So Kenya won against Mali 72-66 behind Tyler Ongwa's performance. He put up 16 points, 11 boards, and 7 assists. Actually, he was 3 assists shy from getting a triple-double. He had 7 assists in there. He played pretty well. He was everywhere in the stat sheet. So Kenya finished top 3 in the group, and this led to the Morans heading into the knockout stage. So the Morans matched up with South Sudan, a familiar foe, and Kenya beat them and dragged them in the AfroBasket pre-qualifiers. And I remember they talked a lot of smack in there, especially in local media. So South Sudan were out to get their revenge, and South Sudan won this matchup and eliminated Kenya 60-58 to go ahead to match up against Tunisia. And they lost against Tunisia, but we'll get into that. But in this case, you could see South Sudan got their get back and they were able to eliminate Kenya. So the Morans weren't ready for South Sudan, and they were sent home to let the real contenders play basketball. Despite the outcome of the game, Albert Odero looked great and a good player to build around. Albert scored 18 points, 10 rebounds, and Tyler Ongwa had 5 assists. So this marked the beginning of the end of the Kenya Morans, especially with that AfroBasket outing. And things took a turn to the worst. As a few months went by, the Kenya Basketball Federation and Coach Liz Mills didn't see eye to eye. She wanted to rebuild the team, while the Federation wanted to retain the players and keep things dysfunctional. So we get into that. So the Kenya Morans players released some damaging info to the press that made things worse. So the players released their side of the story. The Kenyan players in the national team released their side of the story. Coach Liz Mills released her side of the story. And this led to Coach Liz Mills and the Kenya Morans parting ways. So the public and the Kenya basketball fraternity learned that the abrupt and unceremonious exit of former Coach Liz Mills, after it emanated from a player's revolt over her management style, conveyed to the KBF executive in a tell-all letter signed by majority of national team players. So the damning letter was making its rounds on social media. So written immediately after the team returned from the AfroBasket Championship in Rwanda, where they managed to win 4 of their matches. The 4-page letter titled Team Morans Vote of No Confidence in Coach Les Mills enumerated a number of issues that players had against the team's cohesiveness with regards to Coach Les Mills coaching them. So her culture and style, so the introductory of the letter was actually pretty insane to listen to look at. So we started off. Her culture and style of coaching had a corrosive effect on the team's morale and fostered a climate of disbelief, fear, division, anxiety, and uncertainty of the team. Former Coach Les Mills dismissed the letter as lies and slander, while KBF Secretary General Ambrose Kisoy maintained that Coach Les Mills' terms of engagement were until the conclusion of the AfroBasket, and the damning contents of the players in that letter could not be wished away. So the players accused Coach Les Mills of poor communication and disrespect of the playing unit and Kenyan basketball as a whole. So the whole Korea is saying in that letter, since joining, her demeanor and mannerisms have been that of a savior who is here to save a pathetic basketball system or shitty Kenyan basketball, as she often referred to it. The letter read at the time. So the Kenyan players, the Kenyan national team players, accused Coach Les Mills of planning to retire players as she rebuilt for the World Cup qualifiers, citing comments she made during a post-match press conference at the AfroBasket moments after the Kenyan Morans fell to Nigeria. So the comments were a response to a question on plans of recuperating younger players like Alberto Dera and Fidel Okoth, who was at the post-match interview with her for their next assignment. So, however, her delivery may not have gone down well with some team members who felt that it was not in her place to say who was set to retire and when. So, Coach Les Mills also added this much at the time. So, she was quoted saying that the AfroBasket was pretty much a way to pay homage to the older players like Griffin Ligari, Tom Mukota, Eric Mutoro, Victor Bosira. These guys who have built the Morans. This was very much their tournament, and they were very happy to have them here for that experience. But once World Cup qualifiers kicked in, it's all for the young players. However, in the letter, the playing unit termed her sentiments during the interview a disrespect to the mentioned players, finding out they were being retired without their knowledge at the press conference. Though the letter also read, this statement killed the morale of the team on so many levels. It was unprofessional and uncalled for. Players are working hard to build their brands, to make a living out of this great sport. Calling them old and talking about retirement without the courtesy of letting them know beforehand does not help the situation whatsoever. So that letter has had so many things that the Kenyan Morans had in there. So the squad also accused Coach Les Mills of disregarding the team's past performance, like AfroCan in 2019, alleged that on numerous occasions she had voiced that most of the team's previous wins were against inferior teams, which is true. Because if you closely look and forensically analyze, like the teams that were in the AfroCan tournament, you could see there were Team B's, Team C's, or Team D's in there. So they were inferior teams. Despite Kenya beating Nigeria and Cote d'Ivoire, they did not feel their first team. They feel their second team, third team there. And if they had stars in there, they didn't have the big names in there. So the letter continued. This was very offensive to us, knowing that some of these moments are the greatest moments of our basketball careers, the letter added. So you could see how shallow some of the players in there were. And I wasn't even pulling back, because you could see some players in there, they have such a closed mind. And this was the reason why it led to this. Further, the letter accused Coach Les Mills for changing a winning system that proved to be successful from pre-qualifiers. So this was actually pretty interesting, because the Kenyan Morans have never looked dominant in any part outside of the AfroCan tournament, where they played against group. They played against bench players. So the Kenyan Morans have never had any success in AfroBasket. They never had any success in the FIBA World Cup, and this damning letter just proved everything that we needed to know. So the letter also had this. I mean, changing the whole system without proper regard to the available personnel and the team's identity is one of the reasons we only won 2 games under her leadership. We totally understand tweaking and addition of plays needed to be done, but there's no way to justify scrapping out a whole system of play, both offense and defense. So you could see the rigid nature of the team, which shows that they were not ready to change. So the players also took issue with the alleged division into local-based and international-based players, saying that constantly undermining the former led to feelings of disrespect against, citing a post-match interview at the Afrobasket and off-the-record comments which could not be authenticated by Mozart Sports. So this is some data just collected by Mozart Sport. I'm just reporting it. So yeah. Coach Liz Mills also added, I strongly suggest that you speak with those who did not sign the letter regarding their experience at Afrobasket and in Cameroon for the Afrobasket qualifiers last year. These players are not represented by those who claim to be representing them. As a professional, I will not respond to questions regarding lies and slander. So you could see Coach Liz Mills, she was pissed off because she tried her best to get the Kenya Morans to win, but all she got was just she just got kicked by them. So the Kenya Morans, the Kenya Basketball Federation, reinstalled Coach Cliff Orr, that had been the Morans coach since 2018, guiding the Morans to silver the inaugural AfroCan in Bamako, Mali in 2019, and propelling them against South Sudan in Nairobi in the pre-qualifiers. So they brought him back in, and they won. And he on his watch, the Kenya Morans, you might think that they had a lot of success, but I can just say they were just played against bench players in 2019. And looking at the way that the outings that they had in the Afrobasket, you could see under Coach Cliff Orr's watch, Kenya got blown out not once, but 2 times in a row, especially. So that led to his dismissal, and having Coach Liz Mills was actually a pretty good get. So Coach Orr exited the team in February 2021 upon the arrival of Coach Liz Mills, whose role at the time was undefined, even as the federation sternly insisted that the former was still at the helm. So you could see there was a bit of a power tussle because they didn't want to release Coach Cliff Orr, but they wanted to bring in Coach Liz Mills. So it wasn't going to happen. One had to go at the time, and Coach Cliff eventually left. So Coach Liz Mills took over the team in February 2021, and at the time, the team needed one way to qualify for the Afrobasket, and which they did because they won that game against Angola, and they're actually pretty good in there. So it was clear that the Morans, the Kenya Basketball Federation, with their impunity, proved to be very unprofessional and did not care about competing at all. And not too long after Coach Liz Mills left, Talongo also followed suit. So after that mutinous letter that the national team players wrote, trying to bring down Coach Liz Mills' character, trying to, besmirch her credibility, Tyler Ongwae, the top player, the star player, left the squad. So Tyler Ongwae, his exit came at the time when the Morans are set to hit camp in preparation for the FIBA World Cup qualifiers scheduled for February. So Tyler Ongwae said this much: I am not completely shutting the door on the Morans, but at the moment, I am not part of the team. I informed the team and management back in September that I was stepping down to focus on club and family, leaving room for up-and-coming players who also have a platform to grow. So you could see he was just giving a shot to the other guys in the country to be able to challenge for that spot. These are the sentiments from the Kenya Morans for Tyler Ongwae, who quietly stepped down from the team after his participation in Afrobasket. So his retirement has been made public at the time, with the national team just had a lot of things going on. We had they lost their coach in there, and the future just seemed bleak because after Tyler Ongwae left, we didn't have a star player, didn't have an elite coach in there. So Tyler Ongwae also added, I have never had any issues with either Coach Cliff Orr until his departure, neither with Liz Mills during her reign. The only thing I have struggled with is the management of the team from the get-go. There is a lot that needs to change on how the team's affairs were handled. If the way the team is managed changes for the better, then maybe I can consider making a comeback. However, that may be too late for me to make to return due to the age factor. So you could see Talongwa is getting older, and looking at the way the Kenya Morans is managed, especially with their team manager, who I must say should be fired because she has done a very piss-poor job currently. I'm not saying that she has not done anything good, but I'm saying she has done a piss-poor job controlling and managing the Kenya Morans till this day up to date, and making them being able to participate in these tournaments and getting them ready for these matchups, and also collaborating with the coach, because the team manager is a woman, and you could see how the federation and the players did to Coach Liz Mills, who's also a woman. So where was she when all this turmoil was going on? So I just leave you to answer that question, because I mean it's just crazy. In the 5 matches he played in the entire qualification process, this was Tyler Ongwae, he averaged 14.8 points, 4.2 assists, and he finished as the team's second leading rebounder, 7.2 boards, and he's also leading scorer in there. So you could see Tyler Ongwae, this was a major blow as a team superstar and top flight coach. Leaving like that left the team in jeopardy, and not too long, the Morans were set to compete in the FIBA World Cup, considering the fact that they don't have a top flight coach and their top scorer and their franchise player. So there was a lack of preparation for this contest. Everything was disorganized. Coach Cliff was brought back, and I mean, it was since his dismissal in 2021 for this campaign, everything was falling apart, and the FIBA World Cup, as the FIBA World Cup qualifiers drew closer. So Coach Cliff was brought back for the third window of the FIBA World Cup, which Kenya was set to compete, and he came in and coached the game, and we had one of the most horrendous performances as the Kenya Morans literally lost 3 straight games. So under Coach Cliff Orr's watch, Congo DR continued their domination in Kenya. They picked up where they left off in the African finals. Congo DR beat Kenya 60-56. Kenya looked small in there, out-rebounding us. And the Kenya Morans played better defense in the second half, restricting Congo DR to 13 points and scoring 11 in the third quarter. But in addition to having a thinner bench in there, in the absence of Fidel Okoth and Ariel Okar, Morans suffered on the rebounds department as the Congo DR team collected 54 rebounds to Kenya's 29 and made Kenya look so small. And this was actually pretty sad because, I mean, looking at on the onset, the way Kenya just got out-rebounded, there was no way Kenya was going to win that ball game if you can't catch the ball. So Griffin Ligari led the scoring at 12 points off 19.4 minutes on the floor. The only Kenyan player to hit double digits on points that game. So, yeah, it was actually pretty bad. So Egypt blew out Kenya by 54 points. This game ended 105-51, one of the biggest losses that the Kenya Morans have had. I mean, there was that infamous 2-point fourth quarter against Senegal, but this one shattered records, shattered even FIBA records, and also got blown out again by 45 points by Senegal. So under Coach Cliff Orr's watch, Kenya has been blown out in embarrassing fashion 5 straight times. I mean, it's actually one of the most egregious things. I don't feel like he should be given a coaching gig at all. In the second window in July, Coach Cliff was no longer available, and Coach Sadat Gaya took over as the head coach. Things got embarrassing as the Ministry of Sports told the Federation that they were on their own and didn't facilitate their participation in the tournament. So the Ministry of Sports, Culture and Heritage, through the State of Department of Sports, has announced to sports federation across the country that they are not in a position to facilitate any international events for the remaining for the remainder of the 2021-2022 financial year. So this was coming at the time for the election last year, so at the end of the financial year. This is after exhausting the allocation of sports, arts, and social development, as said in the financial year, which ended in June 30th. And 1st to 3rd of July is when the Kenya Morans are supposed to compete. So due to budgetary constraints, the Department of Sports has further requested federations to seek sponsorship from other organizations to facilitate their national events. So this is just basically the Ministry of Sports just telling federations to fend for themselves and you're on your own. So that was just that, and it was actually something that was actually pretty bad to see. The State Department of Sports, which has been facilitating various sports federations through that funding for international events, is not in a position to do so. This is because the sports department has exhausted its funding allocation for that year. So this was actually pretty sad, and it was coming directly from the Ministry of Sports office. So this is therefore to inform all federations expecting funding that they will not possibly get any funding due to budgetary constraints. So this was actually pretty sad, and when this news broke, it just threw a spanner in the works on the Kenya Morans flying out. So sadly, this was a low point for the Kenya Morans. The Kenya Basketball Federation Secretary General Ambrose Kisoyo was quoted as saying, "We have been given the leeway to arrive in Egypt latest 1st July at 9 a.m. local time so that we can undergo the required checks before our match slated for later that day. We should have been in Egypt on 28th June if our previous arrangement has stood. However, the team will be out of the country as soon as possible." So he was just confirming. So he was actually confirming that the Kenya Morans are going to leave and depart, and if they had the funding, they would have been able to move. But that was not the case. Talks with FIBA began when we realized they could not find a way. They had to find a way for the team to play. They have shown willingness to help. They will cater for travel expenses and will pay the debt owned later. So initially, we had requested them to cater for accommodation, but realized they will be of much more help with the latter expense. So you could see the Kenya Morans had no funding. They had to let FIBA step in, which is actually pretty embarrassing, as other nations were able to get there, nations that were serious with the competition, like South Sudanese team. I mean, a team that is just in East Africa just came in and dominated and just made us look bad in there. So yeah, I mean, he was also quoted as saying, so the Secretary General was also quoted as saying, "We did a letter to FIBA expressing our inability to travel despite their help with the expenses, and after extensive consultations following the letter, they took it upon themselves to find us the seat space and now able to travel." So it took FIBA's intervention for the Kenya Morans to travel. So meanwhile, the team had been training at the Nyayo Indoor Arena in preparations for the assignment under Coach Zaragai, which is actually pretty funny, because if you look at the way they had been training, they are not training for a FIBA event. This is not training for a FIBA event. They're actually training for it's like they were training for a normal KBF game. So however, the government's communication on lack of funds and ensuing responses to said information through the non-residential camp in disarray, and this was actually one of the biggest blows in there. So this level of incompetence and irresponsible behavior by KBF, the Kenya Basketball Federation, and in the Team Morans management, led to them missing the Congo DR game. And this was actually a very sad thing, missing that first game and getting blown out again by Egypt. Egypt beat Kenya 72-39. We just didn't look like the Kenya Morans just didn't look like they want to be there. We had 7 players flying out, and the Kenya Morans got blown out again. I mean, Senegal beat Kenya again 86-54. This marked the lowest point in Kenya Morans basketball. The Morans had an 0-for-6 record in the FIBA World Cup. I remember even making videos talking about this. Kenya exit the qualifiers alongside Rwanda, Central African Republic, Mali, and Mali, who are disqualified from the tournament, and the results of all games they play nullified for handing a walkover. So if you had another walkover, if you missed the Egypt game, it will have had implications on their team. So as they haven't won as the Kenya Morans, as we stand right now, they haven't won a game since September 2021 as a national team, and this is the time they played against Mali. That's the only win that they had. And with close reference to 5-on-5 basketball, I'm not mentioning any 3-on-3. The last time the Kenya Morans won was against Mali in 2021 in the AfroBasket. And right now we're in 2023, headed into 2024, and we're already midway. So fast forward to today, they are yet to make any changes that can get them to the next level. The Morans are slated to compete in the African tournament in a month from now, while the real contenders in the continent play in the FIBA World Cup, South Sudan. The Kenya Morans need to release everyone, the team, and just go on a full-on rebuild. Honestly, if you ask me, they should just focus on a rebuild and reset everything and start afresh. So unfortunately, this won't happen. Given their rigid nature, they will continue losing and embarrassing Kenya in every single way with their piss poor performance. But fast forward to today, I mean, the people that the Kenya Morans and KBF neglected and rejected, they've just been having a blast. So Coach Liz Mills, after leaving the Kenya Morans, coached an ASL team in the BL in the second season, and also coached the ABC Fighters. Not only coached the ASL team, coached the ASL team to the playoffs. She also got a job coaching the ABC Fighters in the third season of BAL, and had a winning record better than the ones that she had with the Morans. And in the 2023 BL playoffs, reunited with Tyler Ongwae in the ABC Fighters, and indeed the future just looks promising. The Kenya Morans guard Joseph Situma Kaemba also announced his retirement. He did this last year from the men's national team after 10 years of service. The rest of the Kenya Morans squad just looks like it's up in the air right now. And it's not, and we are not sure what moves lie ahead. And given the fact that the Kenya Morans have been piss poor, especially in FIBA outings, we don't know what roster they're going to field, and hopefully we can be able to know that and be able to know if they're training or not, because a majority of the time them guys just keep turning up a 2-week training camp, then they head on out for the competition. So man, it is what it is. So that's what I got for you guys. So please leave feedback down in the comments. And now this has been a long video just for me just talking about this. And I'm out. Peace, guys. And yes, what's next for the Kenya Morans is yet to be established. So we don't even know if their management is going to change. We don't even know their stance. And yeah, I'm out. Peace out.